Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
I'm ready for this one. It's all about a 4-letter word I have a love-hate relationship with. Yoga. And we have one of the best in the room to help us navigate that 4-letter word. Tim Curran, welcome to Learn from People Who Lived It. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Good. Did you have a little yoga this morning before you got to me?
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
Every day.
So I met Tim. Gosh, we sort of met up at this coffee shop a few months ago. I remember having a little bit of a moment with you right there as we were sipping a cup of coffee. We had never met each other before.
Yeah.
And then we sort of stayed in touch, and finally we're here together to jump into this podcast, man. I'm excited about this one because I wanted to have you on for a long time, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So we're going to talk about yoga, we're going to talk about terms, we're going to talk about your childhood, why you do what you do, your own challenges that you have in life, because there's some synergy there, and there's a moment from your actual yoga class this morning that's kind of quintessential. Oh yeah, that. So I want to dive into that in just a little bit, but in the spirit of yoga, let's work wide and get narrow. Okay. I mentioned that I have a love-hate relationship with yoga. You've mentioned that you've been there before yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's start with things I hear at yoga class.
Okay.
All right. So I go to yoga class and I hear this thing called down dog, downward dog. What's happening? What am I doing? For people that don't know.
Downward dog. Simple pose. Maybe not so simple. There's a lot of work going on there, but it's just a way to lengthen, strengthen, extend the spine and the body. Usually hands down, face down, and tailbone up with the feet driving away from, the tailbone or the palms. And so, you're face down with the heart up above the head. So a little.
Is that important that the head's above the heart's above the head?
There are a number of poses where that is impactful. Yes, it causes the body to work a little differently than, we spend the majority of our day more upright with the head above the heart, right? So the heart's working a little harder with the head down and heart above the head. So those are inversion poses, so to speak. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, here's another pose that we hear or a thing we hear all the time. Savasana. It's like one of my favorite things at the yoga class.
Yeah, your resting pose.
Yeah, right.
One of the more difficult, more challenging poses to do because you're attempting to let go. Typically having spent, 45 minutes to an hour or longer in a class, maybe moving through a flow or a power class, and then just relinquishing, the physical practice, letting go of all the muscular control in your body, letting your breathing be natural, and just being heavy and lying in stillness.
Yeah, it's not as easy. Maybe you're right about that. It's not as easy because you do have to relax to let the ankles fall open or the feet fall open, or can you really just settle in your hips and your butt, not kind of space? Is that what you're talking about?
It is, and all of that being, parts of the body and the physical aspect, but the mind is probably the larger challenge for many, just, not thinking for periods of time. And we'll have those thoughts pop into our mind, and some of us will, let it occupy the space. And, that happens throughout our day all the time, right? It's some of the chaos that we have going on in the mind. And so the Shavasana pose, just, acknowledging those thoughts slip in and then letting them go and just coming back to, no thinking if you can.
Yeah. So not only did I said it wrong, it's Shavasana.
Both ways is fine.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
sure.
Okay. So I didn't mess up too much.
No, not at all.
There are different types of yoga, and I have tried seemingly most of them. What kind of yoga are you into?
My background is Ashtanga-based, the 8-limb practice. And through that, we seem to morph into a lot of vinyasa flow type stuff, right? Pairing breath, pairing movement.
Okay.
And that's foundational in the Ashtanga practice, breath and movement. So moving through, say, a flow or a power aspect of things where you're pairing breath with movement, you put a sequence together, hopefully that resonates well in the body, moving from pose to pose, using your breath to get in and out of poses. And on the other end of the aspect, there's your yin, where you're, holding more stillness for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 minutes at a time, and some restorative practices where it's a lot more comfortable, less working on the body, but still, sitting in stillness in itself is a difficult challenge in yoga, right? And so
I wanted to bring that up because I tried the first couple of times I tried yoga, like I really hated it. I mean, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it, right? And but in my defense, like I tried a hard yoga, I tried a hot yoga class, right, where it was like 400 degrees in that place, right? And after 4 or 5 days, I was like, I'm going to lose my mind in this heat, and then that sets up experience number 1 in yoga sucks. Okay, move on to experience number 2. Yeah. And then I think I tried something else and it just, I don't know, it wasn't for me. But then I eventually found, like, I think it's Hatha yoga. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Hatha, yeah.
Okay, in some of the poses in Hatha yoga, I was like, all right, I get this. And I think for me and a lot of the people who put their nose up at yoga, we just don't understand how much value yoga has in our lives, because we maybe see it like we're going to the gym and we're supposed to be lifting weights and getting stronger, and like that's my workout. And it is, but what's happening in a typical yoga class for somebody that's intentional?
I think the intention brings about a lot of awareness. So through physical movement, you're going to open the body, you're going to strengthen the body, build endurance to better further your practice. More, breath work. So pranayama, the breath, the control of the breath is probably more important than any physical aspect when it comes to movement. And that's learning how to breathe, right? We live in a very fast-paced society. We breathe very shallow here in the States. Studies done have shown that some of our European counterparts breathe 2-3 breaths less per minute than we do here, right? It's 18,000 plus more breaths per day.
Can I interrupt really quick? Yeah. And for anybody who's listening who may have just been triggered there and they're like, I wonder if I'm a shallow breather. How does one know if they're a shallow breather?
Well, sitting and just taking note of how quickly you inhale and exhale, and is it coming through the mouth? Is it working through the nasal passage? It's an automatic function in our body, right? And we tend to give very little thinking to it because it is automatic. And so sitting and just maybe timing how many breaths you take over the course of a minute and really working to not alter your breathing in that moment when testing. And I'm not going to say there's a number you should be shooting for, but with our practice, right, we become more aware. We breathe deeper, and breathing like a physical practice is in itself a practice. You're building the diaphragm, the muscles, right, that support the breathing process. You're also purifying your nervous system a bit, working to stay within your natural parasympathetic nervous system. And when we talk about fast breathing or rapid breathing, like we so often do, day to day, we slip between our sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. Our fight or flight response is another term for that sympathetic nervous system. And so we're very responsive to things going on around us. And some of those things may or may not require our attention, but we tend to give our attention to those items. We become easily escalated. Our heart rate increases, our breathing increases, and through this process of just taking control and awareness of your breathing, trying to slow things down a little bit, harness the breathing, slow things down. My own personal practice, I've relinquished my giving my time, my energy to things around me that don't necessarily require it. While still being present, still being mindful of what's going on around me. Yeah,
it's interesting. I used to, when my kids were little, I was trying to teach them how to breathe properly, because I too have many, many years ago decided to start breathing properly in through my nose, out through my mouth, all belly breath, that kind of a thing. Yeah. And I remember teaching it to my kids, and I said, guys, when you breathe, you just don't want your shoulders going up, okay? We want all belly, right?
That's a good point.
It's a nice little physical exercise, and then I also think that if you're trying to teach a little kiddo, they can lie on their back, just put their hand on their belly, and if their hand goes up, that's like little physical things that you can do to kind of teach even yourself how to breathe properly if this is the first time you've ever been told that you're not breathing the right way.
Right.
What a funny thing.
We, as a teacher, I've started classes in that way, lying on the back, bringing a hand rather to the belly and one maybe to the heart space, and just feel the breath, right? See your belly rise, see the hand on the belly rising together, right? And, maybe breathing to your own heartbeat. And it's just trying to bring that mind-body connection, but also the awareness of, how deeply are you breathing, whether it be in your practice or even away from the practice in your day.
So I think we have a good understanding now of yoga, why it's important, the value, what it can do for people. What did it do for you, and why did you need it so much? I think that's the question that probably backs us up to your upbringing.
Yeah. For the longest time, I had that love-hate relationship that you kind of touched on at the beginning of this podcast. And I was always a physical person, meaning I was involved in sports. Growing up in the Midwest, I was always outdoor playing as a kid. And as I got, into my teenage years and then through college, I took a job in corporate America, sat behind a desk.
What'd you do?
I was in sales, mortgage lending for 18 plus years.
Stimulating.
Yeah, very. Some of those stories.
I can imagine.
But, excessive sitting, huge problem in our culture today. And so, long periods of sitting caused the hips to tighten up a little bit, the lower back, there was pain. And that radiates up the spine into the shoulders, the upper back space as well. And so trying to be active, going to the gym a few times a week, maybe running, taking up some other form of exercise. I'd actually been introduced to yoga on a lost bet. Great story. My students love when I tell this story. I had a friend of a number of years that bet me. We were watching a Cleveland Browns game, and it's hard being a Browns fan. And we made a bet, and I ended up losing that bet. And payment for that bet was for me to attend a yoga class with my friend's wife. She had been bugging him for a long time to get into a class. And so I went and absolutely loved the first class. It was a flow class. Had no idea what to expect. And
what do you think you loved about it? What did you tap into?
The movement in and of itself, but just it was challenging, right? So, I like to be challenged, not just mentally, but physically, pushing a rock up a hill, right? Sure. Okay, so take me into a class where I know nothing. I don't know the pose names. I don't know what to expect.
Right.
All I know is that I'm throwing a mat down and there's these blocks, whatever these blocks are going to be used for, and what am I to do here? And I had that fortunately had a great instructor that first class, and it kind of hooked me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you do any of that stuff we talked about at the beginning, a down dog or a shavasana?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was all part of it, right?
Yeah.
What was childhood like for you, man? I'm wondering how that ties into your practice.
Yeah, it was, a bit rough. Had a very, we'll call it a bit of abusive household. Mom and dad were functioning alcoholics, right? And dad worked, mom stayed at home, raised 5 kids, and very unhappy being at home, being in her relationship. And these are things, you don't necessarily know growing up. It takes being a young adult or middle-aged adult.
Yeah, I was going to say, even you come into your 40s and you're like, holy stuff, that's what they were dealing with. Whoa.
Still every day, it seems I uncover a memory or, a better explanation of things and how they were. And so it was walking on eggshells a lot of my youth around the house. And I always felt that for some reason I was a main target for some of the abuse that was going on. And a lot of it was physical. And so, trying to stay away as often as I could. And when I was there, just enduring it and getting through it. And, not really understanding some of that abuse and from where it was coming. And later learning, it was unhappiness in my parents' own lives. And so I wanted to get away. I realized that probably in my late teens, and, college was going to be my way of getting out of the house. And it was well into 16, 17 years of age. I was still taking beatings at home and made that decision I was going to get out, and eventually did, and spent a good 20, 25 years running from things, making moves to different states, moving further and further away from home, not really knowing why, but through yoga and, my journey through yoga, coming to realize the answer to some of those questions.
Does yoga, when you're in a pose, I know the answer is yes, so I'll ask you to expand on it, but when you're in a pose, sometimes you'll come across a memory that you hadn't thought about, like all of a sudden you'll tap into something, and vividly this memory will appear.
Sure.
And I know that that's happening because we store trauma in our hips. We store it in our muscles. And so when you're I don't know, when you're in a pose and you're using that muscle, oftentimes it's like the memory goes, hey guys, what's up?
Yeah.
What you doing? Oh, we're doing yoga?
Yep.
Let me fuck it up for you. You know, and they're like this whole thing, right? That the trauma's sitting in there ready to do. And so have things come up for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my own yoga experience, realizing everybody has trauma, right? It's a little different for everybody. And I'll remember this forever because this class and this instructor changed my life, right? Changed my path. Being in a pigeon pose, which is a huge, huge hip opener. And
so what does it look like?
You're sitting more upright with one of your legs kind of crossed in front of you. So say right knee down on the floor, the right foot is over towards the left side of your mat. And then your left leg is back behind you and you're trying to sink the hips nice and low and still keep the hips level. And there's a version on the back. You can take a figure 4 version of it as well. But it's a good stretch of the hip. And we talk about storing memories in the hips, the psoas specifically, the muscle of the soul. Muscle of the soul is where we tend to repress and hold things over time. And so this instructor guiding us through a flow class and eventually hitting the floor and going into a pigeon pose and talking about, you may be feeling anger, experiencing anger and emotion, a true human emotion in this pose. And that resonated with me really well.
Because you were feeling that.
I was feeling it, and I was probably grinding my teeth at the time. And I think she picked up on it and she said, you might even have anger toward your yoga instructor for putting you in this fucking pose. And I said, yes.
Yes.
I yelled yes. And the class laughed and, it was a little bit of an icebreaker. And then she approached me after class and said, listen, I think you should think about maybe a teacher training program.
Wow.
You'll discover,
She knew.
Yeah. Having been probably through her own, but you're going to discover stuff about yoga, of course, the training program you hope, but, some things about yourself as well. And I'd been through years of counseling, a couple broken marriages, working through childhood events, the trauma from my parents. But that setting, that dynamic, the yoga teacher training program is where kind of just the layers started to peel back and I started to rediscover who I was, and, some of that trauma really came to surface. And it was, great to have a group of people all holding their own trauma, right? Going through the same training program and us, bonding over that experience and developing probably lifelong relationships and just healing together, right? Because we all have that trauma from someplace in our
Do you wish you would have found yoga 25 years before you did?
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit beforehand and being in our 20s and, yoga, what is this? It's stretching. You're stretching, so you're flexible. That's what you're telling me, right? And I get that even today, a lot of people, especially men,
have that attitude. Yeah.
Yoga, it's just stretching. You're just stretching. So you're flexible. And it's a very small mindset. It's a misunderstanding of what the practice is all about. And so hopefully bringing light to that, that topic of yoga. And it's so much more than just the physical aspect, the stretching and such, because it is that, but so much more. Much more than that.
But you really have to apply that layer. You know what I noticed? Like the first 3 or 4, okay, forget about it. Every time I've been pretty much so far, it's like I'm working so hard to get the pose right because I have this perfectionism.
Sure.
Garbage that I carry with me. And so I'm like in there and I'm like, oh, I'm going to nail this pose. Like I've been in this class for 20 years and my knees are shaking. You know what I mean? Everything about me I'm like the car whose wheels are about to fall off on the freeway. At least that's what it feels like internally. And inevitably a teacher will always come over and just kind of guide or shift or give me a block to help me out. And let's talk a little bit about just being in your yoga class for just a second and all the different aids that are available to people that struggle a little bit up front with getting it all right, because that's an important component to this thing.
The aids are huge, right?
Yeah.
And we think aids in the form of blocks to help bring the floor closer to you, to help hold you up in certain poses. There's blankets for comfort, for padding, straps to, again, bring a grip closer or a body part closer to you. And, the encouragement is, to have people practice yoga safely, right? I always talk about moving within the space of your practice because we're all in different spaces. And equally important to realize from one day to the next, your body could change. You could be carrying shit from one day to the next that maybe restricts you from moving the way you did the day prior.
Right.
Or on the opposite side of that, you could go a little bit deeper as a result of not carrying stuff from one day to the next and finding space in your practice. And so having these props to help, right, and being humble and realizing, use the props. Use the props to get
I have to.
help. Yeah, I still use them.
Yeah, I have to.
11, 12 years in, I'm still using props. And there's no stigma. You should not be concerned about using props. If anything, they should be put out by an instructor and encouraged for use. And there are practices. The Iyengar style of yoga is a practice where they incorporate a lot of props. And dating way back to move, you used to practice a particular pose using props and master that pose with the props and then maybe without the props before you moved on to learning your next pose, right? So, and then we think about some of those other classes like a yin class or a restorative class where they're a requirement, right? They're there for your comfort. They're there to help you find space in your practice. And so always encouraging to use.
Let's talk about maybe how yoga. So you mentioned a couple of failed marriages, and then but you're in clearly a different place and space now. I don't know if you're married again, but life is seemingly different for you
Very
now.
much, yeah.
How long did the transition years last for you? You know what I mean? Because I've shared my story before. It's like 2017, the back pain really starts to settle in. Yeah. And then that's when the mental stuff for me starts to kind of really settle in. And it's not till 2021 that I really come out of it and I feel like different version. So we're talking like 4 years.
Yeah.
That I kind of sat in my garbage.
Yeah.
What was your transition time like?
Probably a little longer. I did my... so going back to that particular class, that was probably fall of 17. Entered the teacher training program in January of 18. But I had been in therapy, in and out with counselors, therapists for a few years.
Did you get any good tools from them?
Some, yeah. Some are better than others. And journaling, right? So if we want to talk about some tools, some journaling. Journaling became a habit, right? And so, just taking a few minutes out of the day, maybe early in the day, to write some things down. I wake up feeling this way and write some things down. And, before going to bed, writing down maybe some accomplishments throughout the day, just kind of tracking my emotions a little, my moods a little bit more, bring awareness into my space, right? I want to say meditation has always been something a counselor or a therapist has recommended. And, very, very simple definition is just sitting alone and breathing. Right? It's a very simple process. And I think a lot of people put too much into what meditating is in their mindset, right? So another misconception.
It almost seems like overwhelming.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't describe it and they're like, oh, I have no idea what this thing is. Yeah.
Well, it's coming back to that, the process I described earlier of sitting in stillness and trying to get out of your own head.
Sure.
Right? We've got all these thoughts going around, the chaos in our mind, right? So trying to get out of your own head and just sit, just be still, a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. We're in like yoga, like breathing, like so many other things that we do in our life. It's a practice. You have to build up to it, right? We spend years creating bad habits in our bodies, in our life, in our mind. And so thinking that you're going to walk into a yoga class and nail every pose the first time around, even if you're physically fit and your body's completely open, it's not realistic. You have to give in to time as a factor, and you're going to need to take time to open the body, to develop things in the body and the mind, to develop your practice.
All right. So 2017, you discover something's going on.
Yeah.
What does ownership look like for you? You discover it, you own it, then you lean into the new way of life. Yeah. So what does ownership look like for Tim?
It was taking a look in the mirror and realizing I didn't like the guy staring back at me.
In what way?
Just felt, I don't know how to describe it really in this moment. I don't want to say creepy. just didn't like who that guy was and what he was about. I had mentioned
like almost the physical makeup. You just looked at it and you were like, gosh.
Well, what was I living for? Who was that guy in the mirror? What was he all about? Meaning, what was he living for day to day? And at the time, I was chasing money, had a good corporate job, making a lot of money, buying worthless shit that I didn't need. Right. Lived in a huge house.
Made you feel better for a while.
It did, right? You buy something, I feel good. Then I get the expensive car, and then another car, and just going through the motions, trying to fill that void, not realizing what I was doing, right? And realizing one day, looking at myself, going, it doesn't feel right. I don't like what you're doing, and facing myself and having that conversation in the mirror. And there's a lot of great stuff online about addressing some of these issues and how to. I'm going to throw out her name, Mel Robbins.
Yeah, sure.
A number of
lot
videos,
of people know.
and she has a number of techniques about using a mirror and staring at yourself and even touching in the mirror. And it was just, I didn't know about it then, but I just took the moment to lock eyes on myself and realize that you got to make changes. There's got to be something more worth living for. I was very unhappy. The money being what it was nice because it afforded nice things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I wasn't happy. I was angry. I was an empty shell, and my relationships were failing one after another. And it was never my fault, right? So there's that aspect of owning your own shit.
So you really had to own on a very new level for you because you had seemingly not done that before.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's stay in this lane, man, this ownership lane. You with the prior relationships with your kids. I don't know how many you have, but what did ownership look like for that?
Well, it was uncovering a lot of crap in the past that I had stuffed down, right? So moving from one relationship to the next, and I've never been that guy who needs to be in a relationship, but just going back and kind of looking at how things ended in each of those relationships. And it was much easier to end a relationship when it was me ending the relationship. If it was the woman on the other end ending the relationship, then I struggled. A power thing, I guess.
It could very well be ego. Yeah, Makes sense
control,
that it would be.
Lack of control, right? And so...
I want to make the decision.
Right. And so facing that first and foremost. And so going back and listing the women that I dated over a period of time and how did it end and what were some of the things I remember. So dredging up all of that, right? And then, seeing the patterns of behavior and...
You talk about a gross feeling.
Oh my God. Well,
right?
And that's, the guy in the mirror, that's part of it. Yeah. And so I'm in teacher training at this point, and I'm, connecting with some people with some trauma, and most of them are women, right? It's yoga, and I don't want to say it's dominated by women, but it's far more women than men, and
heavily influenced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Addressing, talking to these women about some of these failed relationships and, not being afraid to open up and express, some of the details, which are, I even feel uncomfortable. I'm shifting in my chair right now. We're having this conversation because it was just awful behavior. And, feeling vulnerable and being okay with being vulnerable to have these conversations with women and to get their opinions and kind of talk through the process. And then it was a series of phone calls.
Oh, you did that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Where are they at? Can I look them up? Can I find them? And of course, you can find almost anybody these days, it seems. And so reaching out and, I don't want to say it's part of a process, right? There are a number of step programs out there that's, taking ownership and apologizing for things that happened in the past, asking for forgiveness, right? But learning to forgive myself was a big part of that too, right? Asking for forgiveness and accepting that I'm not a perfect person, that I'm, I have my faults. We all do, right? And being okay with that and just trying to be more aware and try to learn from these experiences going forward, right? Take what I'm learning in this process of reaching out and try not to make the same mistakes going forward, try to break these bad patterns of behavior. And
Man, good on you for making amends.
Yeah,
That's just such a courageous thing to take on.
Well, and, the support I had was tremendous. And I think a lot of people maybe don't make it through the process because of a lack of support.
I'd say that's probably a good truth. And it sounds like you really found maybe for the first time in your life, you found like this great, safe group of people that you could completely unload on.
Yeah. Well, and that's the yoga community is full of great people.
Yeah, right.
And there's a lot of teachers out there, and it's not just yoga teachers. It's, people who are going through their own healing process. The community provides a great outreach. There's people there that, from all walks of life and all types of different jobs and backgrounds. And I've got a lot of therapists that come to my class, a lot of psychotherapists. And
that makes sense. They need to release all the stuff they take on.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? We all do, right? And I've got a background in both psychology and sociology, bachelor's degrees, thought about going that route. We're talking 20, 25 years ago. And I remember talking about therapists needing therapists, and it didn't sit well with me back then, right? But
really?
Definitely having a better understanding of that after all these years.
How fascinating that you got a degree in this, and I'm going to be totally transparent with you. The thought that popped into my head right away was, I don't know, and I'm wrong, you let me know, but your life may have felt a little crazy, a little chaotic. You had just left your mom and dad's place a few years back. Going down that road of psychology may have meant looking at yourself closer, and you just didn't, you wanted something different. You looked into a different path where like you can crunch numbers, you can work papers. These can be other people's situations. They're not your problems. I don't know. Am I crazy to have that thought or?
Well, since we're being transparent here, it was actually 9/11. The event on 9/11 that changed my path, because I was still in the field of psychology. I was doing research at Case Western in Cleveland. It's a medical school, and was actually taking class and in pharmacology department doing some breast cancer research studies.
Wow.
Yeah, no place I'd ever imagined myself being, but loving where I was at.
I can imagine.
I remember that Tuesday morning, we always had a radio going, and they, had announced that a plane had hit the tower. Well, the research department I was working in was funded by the U.S. Army, so there were a number of grad students, and I was low on the totem pole. And shortly thereafter, a bunch of people came together, made decisions that they were going to redirect money from educational aspect to military aspect, right? And so some of the money that was used to fund tuition, stipend, housing, all that stuff went away for me and a couple other students. And I ended up then finding a job with a friend of mine who was in the mortgage business. And that was my next, 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like maybe you just didn't fight it. Like it presented itself, you took it, I way over psychoanalyzed that whole thing.
Well, I had done a very short stint in between getting my bachelor's degree and going back and finding a job in research. I had worked a little bit with my friend at a different mortgage company and had an understanding, had the background, knew how to read credit, and so I at least had something to fall back on. And it was just unfortunate that things happened, ended up falling back on it and became way too comfortable, right? Making the money, early to mid 20s, making that kind of money and just, finding happiness, I thought, in all the wrong places, as it turns out. And so there was...
yeah, but you mentioned that you went to therapy while this was happening. So what are you talking about then?
Well,
this
was my early 20s, and so I had had one of those quick marriages in my early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that marriage, there wasn't too much to talk about. We knew we were
just
young.
young.
We knew we were making. We didn't know at the time, right? We were in love. Yeah.
Sure.
Whatever love means to 20, 21, 22, 23-year-old.
Listen, that love's real too.
No doubt.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. It wasn't until. It's my son. So you mentioned kids. I have one son. He's 17. He's amazing. He was born in 2005. My then wife and I were having problems. They were there in the marriage. They just weren't showing themselves, or I wasn't paying attention. And so about 5-6 months after he was born, we were in counseling, and working through some of those issues. And
it's funny, isn't it? People always think babies are going to make people stronger. Like, we'll have a baby and it'll bring us closer together. I'm like, or the opposite.
Or the opposite. Yeah.
It's a lot.
We wanted, right? It was planned.
Sure.
We wanted children, and it can create a division, right? Time and attention is limited, and not that any of that was our downfall. It's just there were some other things going on in the background, and they never quite got worked out. And we were together for 6 years. We ended up divorcing. My son was almost 6 when we divorced. I'm sorry, almost 5 when we divorced. And we were still going back and seeing counselors, same counselor, right before the divorce. And then we tried a couple different counselors, different approach, and it just, and it was all the same. They all had the same outlook. And the last one saying, listen, I'm a marriage counselor, but you do clearly need to be apart. And it was the best decision for us.
Yeah. Isn't that great when somebody finally has the goal to tell you what you need to hear?
Yeah, it's a scary process.
And you both probably kind of felt it and knew it and all the things anyways. Just, I don't know what that is. It's a funny thing that we all fall into from time to time where we're almost not brave enough to confront the truth, and we just need somebody to be real straight with us. And we tend to appreciate those people when they come into our lives too. That's the thing, right?
Yeah. Well, you think about, we're about the same age. The upbringing was, you go to school, you get your good grades, you move on to college, you graduate from college, get your job. And, at that time it was still, I graduated high school the early 90s. The auto industry was still, firing pretty hard. You can get a job in sales, the steel plant, if you wanted one of those blue collar jobs and make a decent wage and support your family and have lots of kids. And that's that Midwestern mentality, maybe a little bit coming through. But, I followed that path of, graduate, get married, have children, buy the house, have children in that order, whatever. And then, realizing at some point is this doesn't suit me. This is not who I am. And I think we tend to go automatic in this aspect. It tends to be, I don't want to say the American way, but it seems to be the thing that's.
So let me ask you a question. Yeah. What are you telling your son who's coming into all of this stuff that you hated?
Yeah.
Right?
Nothing. Best message I think I've given him, no expectations, right?
Yeah.
You're not expected. He's 17, he's done with high school, and we're talking about enrolling in community college, and I would love for him to do it just to get to be around more kids his age.
Yeah. If nothing else, I would say to my kids, just look at it like a networking.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're around people all the time. There's things that can happen in those places. So
he's a gamer. He spends a lot of time alone. In those last couple of years of school, he was online, so he wasn't in a classroom. And so just having that social aspect, that outlet, right? Connecting with people your own age, and I'm encouraging him that in that way, but if he doesn't want to go, I'm not going to force it on him. You don't want to make him do something he doesn't want to do. I don't force yoga on him. He sees me do it around the house. He asks questions, but I'll never force it on him. I don't want him to feel like he has to do something for me because of me. I want him to do what he wants to do, right? Only he knows what he wants. And it changes from day to day, it seems, but.
Did you ever have to have any tough conversations with your son when you were kind of, reshaping your life a little bit? Did you guys ever have a heart to heart? And have you, I wonder about that because, and let me set up the reason that I asked this question. When I got home from my retreat, the first thing that I wanted to do was talk to my boys and say all of the things like, that was me, that wasn't you. I'm so sorry that, you witnessed some of that stuff, but, I don't know, I can't unwind it, but I promise you that was not you. It was me working through some really difficult things and Did you have to do something similar?
Yeah, we've had some my son has always been very open.
Cool.
His mother would describe him as an empath to some degree where he picks up on how other people are feeling quite a bit. And he's always been intelligent. His vernacular has been incredible. He's got a great vocabulary, loves to have conversation. And I've had great conversations, sometimes better than, adults my own age even. And so there was a number of years where he was splitting time between his mother and I, and he would come out here because we lived in different states. So he was in California, and he'd come out once a long weekend and spend it with me, and then he'd spend 2 months out of the summer here while he was on break. And one of the memories that keeps, even earlier this week, one of the things that came up was I was out doing something in that big house that I talked about earlier. I was out in the driveway doing something with the car, and he and one of his friends were inside playing hide and seek. And I came in and I was looking for him, and I couldn't find him. And I'm yelling for him, and I couldn't find him. And now I'm getting frustrated and maybe a little, furious about the process. And I'm walking out towards the garage down the hallway, and the dryer door pops open, and he pokes his head out, and he's hiding in the dryer. And, I immediately lose it and just go off. And I'm yelling, get out of the dryer. And I'm yelling at him about all the bad things that can happen. And here's this, 8-year-old kid, scared shitless. Why is dad acting this way? He doesn't quite put 2 and 2 together. And, I overreacted clearly. And he brings that story to me whenever we come together, we start talking, and things get escalated. Because to him, it was a trigger. And I remember as a kid having these triggers myself, seeing my parents act in a certain way. I knew things were going to go bad. And it just brings me back to that ugly guy I remember looking at and going, you got to figure out a better way to communicate with your son. And so getting control of my own emotions was a big step, this process. And I'll come back to that because I have a bit to say on men and emotions in society today. But, sitting down and not wanting to be the guy who says everything, because I want him to open up, and I want him to talk to me, and I want him to pose to me the issues that he sees. And sometimes that's calling me out on my own shit, which as a parent, having your child do that sometimes is very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? And so, we go into and we schedule it. We'll say, hey, we're going to sit down later today and we're going to talk, right? And here are some of the things that we're going to hit on. These are some of the things I've saw over the last week or two that, I want to talk to you about. And we'll schedule it, and we'll sit down, and, sometimes we bring notes, sometimes we don't. We just kind of wing it, but it always ends in a hug. I love you, and that I didn't have as a kid. I didn't have the ability to communicate with my parents. There was never my side or my siblings having a side. It was just you did as you were told, and if you talked, you got hit, right? And there was never, it was a very cold household. There was no I love you. There was no hugging, no kissing, none of that stuff. And so being able to be comfortable as a man telling my male son, I love you, and being able to hug him and reassure him and make him feel safe in that moment, right? And of course, not escalating, not beginning to yell and fire back at him, and being calm enough to hear what he has to say, and then pausing and in turn giving my side to things or my answer to his questions, right? And so creating a safe dialect space, and it's been amazing. It's been amazing to see him communicate and just flourish from it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about men and our ability to, be super unemotional.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. So it's I'm a hockey coach, and so I see it all the time. We had a kid who had a little shoulder injury a couple of weeks ago, and all the guys on the team are razzing him. You wuss, man up. There's all this crap that's still taking place.
Yeah.
And it's like this badge of honor to be hurt and wounded.
Right.
The hell is that? In your estimation, what is that?
Yeah. It's pride, it's ego.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was our upbringing. It was, play through the pain. It was don't bitch and moan, don't cry.
Right.
Men don't cry. Boys don't cry. Right. And so hold that shit in.
Nobody cried.
Nobody cried. Right.
And because if you did, I'll give you something to cry about.
All too familiar, that phrase.
What is that?
And how that ties to yoga, right? Since we're here talking about yoga, it's, you hold that shit in and you press that shit down and you repress that over time, and it just builds. It's a kettle waiting to boil over is what it becomes, right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
And it's, there's this whole, I heard this in a show recently, this whole cultural view of men and how we're supposed to hold it in and be strong, right? And we're not given permission to feel, to experience a range of emotions. We're supposed to be very stoic about things, right? And there's not a whole lot of women out there who are wanting or needing to be rescued, right? And so, it's okay to be vulnerable. We have to break through this stigma that, we are not to be emotional, that we are not to cry and show our emotions. And there's just a great, I would say up until early 2000s, maybe about when my son was born in 2005, the generation of men up to that point, we're emotionally stunted. A lot of us never learn from our parents, from relationships, how to be vulnerable, how to process our emotions, be aware of our emotions, right? So,
Sure.
Why am I feeling this way? And is it is okay, and why we question whether or not it's okay, because for so long we were told it's not. You're not supposed to feel that. You're not supposed to show that. And so, having those emotions, realizing they're okay, and finding help in processing them if you need the help, right? That's a big part of becoming more aware and dealing with your shit.
Let me ask you a question. This is almost kind of a dad-to-dad question. When you grow up with the level of trauma you did, you grow up with some of the stuff that I did. When you're trying to change and be a better dad, you're saying like, okay, I'm not going to yell and I'm not going to scream and I'm not going to hit. I'm not going to do all those things. But there are times where I find myself getting so worked up that I'm like, the best thing in the world for me is to eject myself from this situation.
Absolutely.
But then I then I come back to it later and I'm like, well, that doesn't work, punk, because now you eject it as a parent too. Yeah. And you still got to be there for them. And you still got to give them structure and discipline and all of the things that are required of you if you're going to be a good dad.
Sure.
But I'll tell you that I have that inner battle still. Yeah. Every now and again, I'll have that inner battle where it's like, I want to kill them right now. So I'm just going to leave because I don't know what's going to happen, right? Well, I know what's going to happen, or I'm afraid of what's going to happen.
The lesser of two evils, right? Do you stay in that moment all escalated and just bring hell down, right? And that's the childhood I grew up in. It was hell. It was yelling, screaming. It was every kind of abuse you can imagine in the moment, just about. And the other side of that being, do I back out of the situation? You're not running from it, but do I remove myself from this conversation because I'm aware that I'm escalated and something might be said that I don't mean, or that might, hurt my child in such a way, verbally, emotionally. And just having that moment and saying, yes, it's a battle between the ears there, and saying, I think it's better that we table this. Let me take a step back, gain control of my emotions. I think you're giving yourself permission in that space to be in a better space so that you can continue the conversation. And my son, it's funny you bring this up because we had a conversation about a week ago and I got escalated and my voice went up, the tone went up, and I said something. And as soon as I said it, I knew, it wasn't directed at him, but he knew. And he even said, that's classic old dad. He called me around that shit right there.
Wow, good for him, huh?
Yeah, well, and then it takes me up a level. So one, I'm in that moment, I am shocked and I'm embarrassed by it.
Yeah, right? that's the truth.
But like you said, in the moment, I'm like, this little shit is calling me out, right? And now I got my shit out there. I got to deal with this. So,
oh wow,
I proposed, I want to take a step back. I need to get my shit under control and we'll revisit this. And he looked at me and he said, this is a conversation you cannot run from. And I said, I understand. And I hope you understand. It's better that I take the time to calm down and get control of my emotions before we go any further, because I don't want to say something more, right? That's going to result in some type of trauma. 20 years down the road, you're going to come to me and go, remember when you did or said this, right? Yeah. And so I think it's positive to give ourselves those moments, those breaks, right? And realize we're about to cross over a line or over an edge where there may not be coming back from. And it causes damage. It absolutely will cause damage. I'm living proof. We're all living proof of it, right? We're all carrying that shit that things were said or done to us a long time ago.
So as we wind down, let's go back to where we started, which is yoga and the healing powers of yoga. What has it represented for you as a human being? What has it done to you? How has it changed your heart and your mind?
I heard early on yoga, the journey of the self through the self to the self, right? And I continue to hear that. I continue to read that, and it's going to translate a little differently for everybody. And for me, it was this process of there's the physical aspect of it. Yes, that I open the body, I become more flexible and all that. But through breath work, through meditation, pairing that with my practice, I've just become more aware of who I am as a person and what impact I have on the others around me. And I never went into the teacher training program with the intention of teaching. I came out of it wanting to share it with everybody I could touch, everybody I could talk to, right? Because it's such an amazing, I feel, gift. And it really turns into a discipline. It turns into a daily discipline and a daily discovery, because if you adopt it, and we all have these daily habits we do, from waking up and maybe having a breakfast or a cup of coffee or scrolling through reading news or whatever it might be, right? With these daily habits, I'm just injecting yoga as one of my daily habits. So that's getting up and doing certain behaviors.
Like what? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I got a morning routine of so hygiene. Some things that we learned, the Ayurvedic piece, which is old Indian medicine. It's an Ayurvedic piece is to wake up in the morning and scrape the tongue.
Okay.
And so had no idea of any of this going into this training program. And so, finding this device that you drag across your tongue, and, why are we doing this? Was the question, obviously. Well, as you sleep at night, your body is working to process toxins out, right? Sending things to the kidneys to release in the form of waste in the morning. Well, your tongue also, for example, holds a coating of waste that needs to be removed from the body. So instead of waking up and drinking water, coffee, milk, or anything and washing it right back down into your system, ama is the term, A-M-A, ama. You want to scrape that ama, that yucky stuff off your tongue,
right,
and get it out of the body as quickly as possible. No different than, feces or urine. It's waste that needs to be eliminated from the body.
So you get up, scrape the tongue, then brush your teeth?
Scrape. I'll wait a little bit before brushing, because I might eat or drink something, depending on if I'm practicing a fasting process or not. Okay. A little bit of oil pulling. So I might gargle a little bit of sesame oil, and 15, 20 minutes. And that pulling process is pulling through the nervous system throughout the body. It's pulling toxins out of the organs. It's bringing them into the mouth in this fluid that I'm swooshing around in my mouth, and then spitting that out and then brushing. But also rubbing, various types of oils on the body in certain areas where I might have dry patches of skin. So coconut oil, sesame oil, depending on the season, depending on the dryness. And there's a bathing process involved if you want to hop in the shower and then rinse that all off. And, so these are daily practices that just become, a little difficult to start, like anything else, but they develop. And you develop your morning routine, and these are part of my morning routine. And then it's, a dozen, 20 poses, opening the body in this way, knowing that I'm teaching this class in this way or that class in that way. What do I want to do to open my own body so I can participate? I mentioned the Ashtanga practice, my training. So I might do a condensed version of the Ashtanga practice, some sun salutations, to, awaken my body, align my body better, but, making sure that I'm ready to leave the house feeling, I'm ready to conquer the world.
So you kind of give the mornings to yourself.
Absolutely. And it means waking up earlier than I've ever, and it's a great lesson for me. My son here is I used to be that guy who slept as late as I could, right? Have to be at work at 9. I'm going to sleep till 8:30. I can get up, get a quick shower, maybe a quick bite to eat as I'm headed out the door, and be to work at 8:59 and on time. And now I'm up at, 5:30 in the morning. And I want to be up when the sun comes up. And that, too, becomes routine. It becomes habit. And
how long did that take for you?
It took a couple years, honestly. it was forced. I forced it on myself to do it. It also means going to bed a little earlier at a more reasonable time. And then there's all kinds of things that fall into place as far as when you eat your last meal. How long have I had to digest before I go to sleep? Because you want your body, through that digestive process, about 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed, right? So your last meal, if you're going to bed at 10 and you're done eating by 6:30, 7 o'clock, so that your body has the time to process the digestive workings. And then it'll work to do its thing overnight to remove toxins ready for waste in the morning. But you want a nice, healthy, restful sleep. You don't want your body digesting food that you might have consumed a half hour before you went to bed, right?
Sure,
and so all that comes into play. It's just being more aware of when I eat, how much I eat, what I'm eating throughout the day, obviously.
Is that my phone?
That's mine.
Oh, okay. No sweat. Yeah. So you're paying attention to a lot of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. More aware than I've ever been. And, it's little daily rituals, little daily habits that form, just a little at a time. You can't go into it trying to make big changes, numerous changes all at one time. You have to take small steps. I spent all those years, 18 plus years in a corporate job, sitting at a desk, right? Hurting my hips. Over time, it got worse and worse and worse, right? So I can't expect that day one yoga, I'm going to be okay just from doing one class. I've got to work over time to reverse that process, those bad behaviors of sitting that I've done to myself over the years.
How many times does somebody kind of need to take yoga in order to feel some benefits? That's probably a tough thing to answer. But I mean, do you need a few classes in a row so you can kind of find a rhythm, get used to the poses, get your breath under control? Like those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about.
It's different. It's going to be different. It's going to be different for everybody based on your knowledge, based on where you are in your practice, the body. I've never left a class going or saying, I wish I hadn't done that. I always feel better leaving a class. And I don't always give it my all. There's no requirement that you have to do anything that everybody else is doing or being cued to do by an instructor, right? Just being in that space, it's a shared energy for a lot. Being in that environment, it's easier, many people tell me, to come and do yoga in a community setting than it is to do it at home.
I could imagine.
Yeah. And so, one class, I would hope, but, those are my, I don't want to say expectations because that can often lead to failure, right? Or disappointment. So, I would say give yourself time to come to different classes, try a couple different techniques, different instructors. How the instructor teaches the class is huge as well. So, get out there and try a few different types of yoga, different times of the day. Your body's in different space in different parts of the day.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So some people are morning people. Some people, prefer to do it in the nighttime. Mm-hmm. So, no one way works for everybody. Yeah.
We'll connect you in our show notes to anybody that wants to work with you and wants to take a class or look into some private situation or whatever that may be. As we wind down, is there anything that you feel like you came into this conversation to share that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Oh, there's a world of information out there about yoga, and a lot of what I'm online, I'm looking at stuff, I'm looking at other instructors, I'm, constantly learning, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's some stuff that's questionable, and if you're looking to get into yoga or looking to go deeper into yoga, submerge yourself. Just go out and find a class. A lot of gyms are offering yoga. Yeah. There's a number of studios around town, a lot of stuff online. Tutorials online, 1-2 minute Facebook or YouTube videos you can do. And again, the quality may not be the best, but it's something, right? It gives you knowledge of what's out there. And one of the biggest things I think that I want to relay to people is when you're in a class, and this is a conversation that came my sister. I was out of touch with my siblings for a number of years and got back in touch with my siblings probably 14, 15 years. And my sister told me she was doing yoga. And at the time, I had just gotten certified and was teaching. And I was all really excited to hear her say that. And, where are you going? What's the studio name or the gym? And she said, long pause, I don't do that shit in front of other people. I don't want anybody looking at me.
Yeah.
And nobody's watching, Right? That's the message I want to give. Nobody is watching. Nobody's looking to see where you are. We're all in our own space. We've got our own shit, right? We carry it with us into that room. We place the mat down. And you just work through that next, half hour, hour and 15 minutes to relieve yourself of whatever that shit is.
Yeah.
Be present on your mat. Go through your practice. Work as hard as you want to work. Don't work at all, right? Have fun with it. Come back and do it again. It gets easier over time.
I love it. Yeah. Tim, man, thank you so much for sitting down and sharing with me today.
My pleasure, brother. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
I think you made me fall in love with yoga a little bit more today.
Well, I hope to see you in a class.
There we go. There we go. I love it. Well, you can find us at learnfromppeoplewholiveit.com and head on over to the show notes. That's where you'll get connected to Tim. Thanks again for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1. To help you feel less alone. 2. Encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3. When you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.